afternoon and welcome to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Stacy, and today is MCK Friday. And today I am joined by Chief Kahsennenhawe Sky-Deer. Welcome. Am I getting better? Am I getting better? I promised I was going to do it, and I did. And every time I have to say it where I have people help coach me, and I keep practicing, and I'm going to pick up.
Excellent.
We were just talking about Mark Miller, and I said how well he speaks, and he could read, and I said that I couldn't. I'm still working. So it means I better keep working harder. Welcome to the show. How have you been?
Not too bad. How about you?
Oh, good.
Surviving this tundra.
It's a little bit weird. It's just been weird. So I guess we may as well start. Let's talk about Canada's Bill C-91 legislation. Let's get right into that. And
Okay.
What's your thoughts?
Oh my God!
I know you have big long lists.
7 interviews yesterday regarding it, and just looking at it from our perspective. I mean, some people from the community did engage in the sessions that they had in the development of this legislation, and there's been years and years of activities behind the scenes that have gone on with First Nations trying to implore the government to really put resources, behind us. Trying to revitalize, reinvigorate the Indigenous languages across this country. So now, with it being, solemnized into a bill and legislation to ensure that whatever government is going to get in afterward, be it this new election coming up or even into the future, that they won't be able to detract from the commitment of having sustainable and adequate funding for languages. So we looked at it as a positive thing. A lot of people asked about, our thoughts on the Inuit statement and so forth. And I said, well, you know what? Every Indigenous group is entitled to their population and how they feel about bills and legislation that passes. I mean, look at some across the country think S3 is the greatest thing, and we're looking at it as a threat. So.
Right.
It all depends on, how it's perceived and welcomed. And for us here in Kahnawake, or at least Mohawk Council of Kahnawake, we see it as a step in the right direction to keep talking about reconciliation and so forth. So when it comes to our languages, or our language specifically, we're doing a lot of work in the community. So I think any kind of financial resources that can enhance the efforts that are already going on right now, I mean, how could we say that it's a bad thing?
Absolutely. But I guess one of the things which wasn't clear with this really was the financial support, right? Correct?
Well, I'm sure as it goes through, all of their deliberations, and we'll find out later on what kind of numbers we're talking about in terms of whether it's going to be annual or, and trying to, I guess, I'll reference one of the press releases that was put out by the AFNQL, the importance of joint implementation with First Nations authorities. We don't want this to be a unilateral thing again where they dictate and direct, this is how it's going to work. And no, we have, authorities within our communities, within our nations that can, I guess, be at the forefront of trying to develop how this plays out and how the monies get trickled down into the communities for the frontline work.
Right. And I mean, we've been very fortunate that there's been a group of people in this community, and we've been doing this for years, and it's getting better and better every year, but it still could use financial support.
Definitely.
There's still things we could be doing.
Exactly. I'll highlight the work of, the Cultural Center now in the community for 40 years. Ietsénhaienhs, which is the work of Iris Gateruni Stacy through the Education Center, and bringing all of the components in the community. We have the Language and Culture Network. We have Collective Impact. And then you think of all of the programs that are already out there in the immersion schools, and Radiwananir, that's the Language Nest, Gardiwanoru. And what if we had more money? Can you
Absolutely.
imagine the new potential and the new ideas that we can do? Part of one that Yerda Patton and I are working on through the Collective Impact is a mentorship program where you would actually pair and partner somebody up with someone. We'll call them either knowledge keepers and knowledge seekers, or I was talking to my uncle who said in Six Nations they called it a master and an apprentice.
Oh.
So you join people up and there'll be honorarium, and we're trying to develop this concept right now. And again, it's all timely, 2019 year of Indigenous languages, and I guess I'll give a quick shout out to the delegation and the representatives from our community who were at the UN last Thursday and did the Ahondagaru and the opening words. So great work is being done all across this community. So I think it's important that we be proud and, you know.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that's exciting is that everything's starting to complement each other. We're not fighting. This is something that I think the whole community can engage itself on. You know, usually you put a topic out there and you got people for, you got this. It's like, let's draw the line down the town. And, you know, it's like, but with this, I've spoken with a lot of people and people are excited. You know, I've had some elders in here talk about that, you know, and and it's good stuff because we have to start as the younger generation, start learning this stuff because of all the other things that are tied to language.
Definitely.
You know, it's not just language. And
No,
I'm not sure sometimes how people see that.
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
the whole wellness package, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, thank you for your thoughts on that. I see you have a list, so we'll just go right by your list.
Okay. Well, of course, everybody knows that we have a S3 working group that's been going out in the community doing engagements and presentations since November, I want to say. Gadzisto Guyo Jocko and I were here on the air, I think, in December.
Yes.
Since then, we've launched an S3 website. It could be found at www.kahnawake.com/S3. And yesterday we had a 4-hour brainstorming session on all of the work that's been done and the next steps that are coming. So we thought it was imperative for the community to stay abreast because this by no means
Is going away.
Is going away,
No.
exactly. So basically, because we know that this is not an MCK thing, like we talked about the fact that it affects the entire community, and that's why we embarked on this process of going to community organizations, going to the people, trying to inform them, having community meetings or table talk sessions to get the word out as much as possible. But moving forward, what we want to do is put a call out to any community members who want to be on what we're going to call a Kahnawake S3 Defense Coalition.
And why that title?
Well, I was just trying to, we brainstormed in terms of, okay, a coalition brings people together from all diverse
And
backgrounds.
that's what you're looking for.
Exactly. They could be community organization representatives. They could be from the traditional body. It could be students. They could be youth, elders. So do you remember the vision statement, the creation of the 2009 vision statement? So people had wrote essays, and then there was focus groups, and then eventually a whole cross-section of the community came together to create this joint vision statement. So we're kind of trying to mimic the process where we want to bring community members together from, you know, all walks of life in the community to develop a Kahnawake position on S3.
Okay.
Because like I said, we don't want it to only be perceived that it's coming from Mohawk Council. It's going to, you know, affect everybody. So we would want the grassroots people and everyday community members to be a part of it if they're interested. So this is the first official call out or notification of this. Anybody who is interested in putting their name forward can contact the membership department. You could either speak to Alexis Shackleton, Alan John Rice, or Jenny McCumber. Just put your name forward and a letter will be forthcoming explaining your role. I think we only require them for maybe 3 meetings.
Oh, okay.
Because the next thing we're going to do, we talked about the collaborative process, right?
Yes.
And how the federal government is doing their own thing when it comes to engaging with First Nations on this. And when we looked at the questions on their survey, when we looked at the way it really wasn't done collaboratively.
No,
it's always, you know, a unilateral approach that we denounced the process. We did an open letter to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, basically saying Kahnawake is going to do things our way. And so moving forward, we want to develop a community survey. We're going to launch it on March 1st. It'll probably be a hard copy survey as well as available on the website or, you know, through SurveyMonkey, because we want to get as many people as possible to view the questions and see what these changes to the Indian Act as a result of S3 mean, like the 1951 cutoff, the 6-1A all the way, the federal government wanting to, it looks like, get out of the business of registration and status, but guess who's going to be holding the liability bag at the end of it all? the First Nations themselves. So create the problem and then try to digress and, absolve yourself.
I'm glad you said that. Let's take a little break and we'll come back and we'll chat a little bit more, because I think there's quite a long history in terms of this that has impacted this community greatly. And I'm sure sometimes people don't understand the impact of it.
Right.
So we'll take a break and we'll be right back. That was a short break. And welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and joining me today is for MCK Friday is Chief Kahsennenhawe Sky-Deer. And prior to going to break, we were talking about the S3, and I guess if we look at the whole issue of membership, there have been so many things that have come. We talk 1951, we could talk about the double mother clause, we could talk about all those things, and a lot of that attempt was the government trying to assimilate or get rid of us.
Yeah.
From the get-go, Indian Act,
of
right?
Course.
So I guess when we're looking at it now, when we look at the S3, it's like open the gates and then we're stuck. But what happens to all the people who were in the middle of all of this, who probably have rights here just like everybody else? What happens to, it's like, it's not a clear cut, yes, no, maybe, you know what I mean? Some people have relations that would be 5-6 generations, would probably not much. And I can't say blood, because blood quantum is not, mathematically is not necessarily a good approach to it, but the connection to here, because there are people who don't live here who do have a connection and should belong here, and how do we do that? And I think that's what the government's kind of hoping, that we'll do it to our own people this time, which opens up a whole nother, that's when I looked at it. That was my kind of thinking.
And I look at the way, the Indian Act has, like you said, impacted the way we've thought about membership, identity, and belonging since the beginning, and looking at the evolution of the laws, I guess, that have impacted this community. So the 81 moratorium on mixed marriages, because of the Native women who are marrying out and losing their rights and status. So us putting an attempt at equality and saying, okay, from now on, anybody that marries out is going to lose their status and, rights, etc. To the evolvement into the 1984 Mohawk Law.
That's true, yes.
Which incorporated blood quantum, like you said, the 50% blood quantum threshold. And if you think about at the time, Kahnawake had so many iron workers, and you want to talk about being able to live, work, and go to school, etc. in the United States, that requirement of the border to have 50% blood quantum. So that became a part of our reality, and why, if our people aren't 50%, then they're not going to be able to work outside, etc. So that became a component to eventually saying, you know what, blood quantum is not a real construct. No. How could you give people these numbers to, let's say, all right, it'll be lineage based. Yeah. So the evolution into the 2003 membership law, being 4 out of 8 Ungwehunwe or Ganyagahaga great-grandparents to be eligible to be a member. Fast forward to Club Native and all those issues and the Winnie Corn-Miller case. Are we members of a club? How do we identify, who is our people? We know it's family connections, etc. And now what we looked at into the evolvement of our own Ganyagahaga of Kahnawake law, it still has the component of lineage and the great-grandparents. But we know that there's a number of people in our community who still don't make that cut.
No.
And they probably won't ever meet the criteria, and therefore why the residency law becomes important, because who can live amongst us, especially in light of S3, when the government is dictating to us who is our people without our having any kind of say or involvement. So when it was first requested to have this urgent residency law go through the community decision-making process, we went to the community. There was extensive surveys that were done. Everybody felt that there was a requirement and necessity to have a residency law. And part of the delays that we've experienced, and why it's taken 2 years, I'll say, because in May it'll be 2 years since we requested the mandate, is the Ganyagahaga of Kahnawake law had to pass first, because there's so much overlap in terms of the definitions and components within it. Because don't forget, the 2003 membership law had the residency and the membership all joined into one. And when you think about people getting angry over membership, they
Yeah.
were angry over who is a member. They're angry about who's living in the community.
That was the issue.
So now that we've separated it and we basically created a law from scratch, a whole new residency law, that took an extensive amount of time. The KKL, the KahnawakeTV of Kahnawake law, only passed in June of last year. And then what happened? Federal legislation on cannabis legalization, and the urgency became to get something in place prior to the federal law passing. So hence all these delays, and things happen, we know, but the fact of the matter is now it's here. We're ready. We just went through the final draft this week. We have a working group on the residency law. So it'll probably be posted for a final review for the community next week on the KahnawakeMakingDecisions.com website. If you've never been on that website, all of the laws that impact the community of Kahnawake are on that website. Even from the old laws, like the pigs at large,
Oh my God,
laws
yeah.
that were, enacted because of whatever was going on at that time in the early, 1900s to present day. So yeah, it's www.KahnawakeMakingDecisions.com. One word. And all of our laws are there, so it'll probably be posted starting next week, hopefully. And again, we're using all of the S3 engagements for people to realize what's coming as the ramp up to get this passed. Because what happens with an urgent law is once the community the council passes the law, and it went through the urgent process, in 1 year it has to go through that regular process. So, at that point, the community will be able to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we'll make any adjustments because we'll have already gone through giving permits and, looking at how this functions and if any amendments are required. So I'll just, announce a few other activities that are going to be going on with regard to S3. There is a winter community meeting that's scheduled for February 26th. At this meeting, we will be doing our final community presentation, PowerPoint on Bill S3. We do have a few more scheduled in the community. February 13th next week at the KOR, for the staff board and that's students. We also were able to schedule for the KSS senior class, grades 10 and 11. That's going to be happening in March after their March break. And we definitely need to coordinate an elders one. I think the elders have the right to know too what's coming, if it's either going to be at the Elders Lodge or the Golden Age Club, or just have an open meeting for the elders to come and hear what's happening now. They've been privy to all these membership issues.
I'm sure.
Since
they've probably been going to a lot of those meetings too. When it used to be almost 200 people in the community meeting.
Right. Yep. So, and then, as I mentioned about this S3 Defense Coalition, in the month of April, like we said, we want them to develop an official community position. So 3 meetings, letters are going to be going out to all of the organizations that participated in these engagements and the presentations from November to see if they'll identify one representative so that they could bring the information back to all the people they work with to say, this is what's being contemplated and discussed. Here's some of the action items. What could we as a community do? Because if after every presentation, if you could see the feedback.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you, just overall, not specific, but what are people saying? Because I think it's a concern.
Yeah,
I think everybody's concerned.
Yeah, they're upset, they're angry, they can't believe that in today's reality that the federal government is still, meddling in our affairs like this, and them deciding who they say are Mohawks of Kahnawake, despite us, creating our own membership law. And another thing that was interesting was the UN made a statement 2 weeks ago declaring that the Indian Act was sexist against women.
Yeah.
But we're looking at it and saying, yeah, but the whole Indian Act is discriminatory against the indigenous people of this country. So, on one breath you denounce the whole law, but in the next breath you're going to talk about components of it and say, well, it's discriminates against women, which we all know.
We know it did. That was because they knew that was how to break the Aboriginal people, because especially in our heritage where it's a matrilineal society. So they took full advantage, to which broke language, which broke all kinds of things. Then you had the whole residential school. So you add through our years, our history, and it makes me wonder sometimes what kept us going, because we're still didn't allow that to bother us as much as it did some other First Nations communities, because some other communities really were hit by it, you know?
Definitely.
That's that resiliency, and, you know, we talk about it all the time, and it's an important thing.
Skana se wugwego. Hey, Oscar Delmanyo Dana Asa FM Kahnawake sa Wadahumsade. Welcome. This is Kahnawake's K1037.
Without mentioning it.
No, it's not a break. This is just a commercial bottom of the hour. Welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Chief Kahsennenhawe Sky-Deer. And we're talking about the S3 law and the impact and some of the work that's being done locally. And my question was, you know, what was some of the feedback? And people are upset about it. And I think people rightfully so, because you never know. You know, what it's going to be like to be here in this community. And I think sometimes that's been some of the worst thing. You know, if you look at people's minds, you know, that sense of belonging somewhere, but it's been very difficult to belong somewhere because you never know what's coming at you. And if it was done by our own people and our own thing, I think people could live with that. But having an outside group of people come and tell us what you can be, who you can be, and what you can be has been very difficult.
Right. And that's why I said it. The whole United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People has articles within it contained that say Indigenous people have the right to determine their own citizenship codes, their own membership codes, etc. So here you have the Indian Act that directs and says, well, yeah, it's registration and status as an Indian. But when you look at those ban cards, they still tie individuals to nations and communities.
Absolutely.
Without our consent. So, you know, in terms of the feedback, I know Kyle Bordeaux, who was our communications and community engagement officer on this whole file, has been keeping track of all of the feedback forms that we've received from every community engagement session that we've had. And like you said, it's overwhelming that the community is pretty upset that they didn't really understand the distinction of registration and the Indian Act and status and what goes on with our own KKL law, etc. So it was important for us because, like I said, we're a part of it. We see this every day, but the average community member doesn't understand the frigazé and the jambalaya that you know has been created as a result of, you know, a federal government imposing their way and will on our people for the last 140 plus years. So it's going to be interesting moving forward. We did send letters requesting to meet with the longhouses to say, you know what, we as a community need to figure out how we're going to address this, because sure, the laws that we have, I don't call them MCK laws, because it's the community that comes out to these sessions to give direction. I mean, don't forget all of the consultation that went into the development of that 2003 law and the elders who were a part of all that movement. I mean, you know, so now that we're at this crossroads in our existence, I think people will be more willing to accept the people who have been here, grew up here, raised here, married back in, who might not meet the criteria, as opposed to now someone who was out of the community for 5-6 generations, that better the one you know than you don't, you know, and if they're given the exact same rights as we are, you know, that's a scary notion for a lot of people.
And I think one of the things some of the other chiefs have said, it was just the numbers, because the number of people that would be allowed by this versus what it already comes here, they're almost double, almost triple the amount.
It's actually tenfold.
Tenfold, eh?
Yeah,
yes.
Because you think right now on our Kanien'kehá:ka registry, we have 6,600 members, or recognized Kanien'kehá:ka of Kahnawake. After Bill S3 goes through, because they are going through this consultation process, right, as I mentioned, to remove the 1951 cutoff.
Yes.
Which means that any woman who had lost her rights going back to Confederation, so 1876 or something like that, and their descendants will all be registered now as status.
Wow.
And not just status, if they can tie an ancestor to Kahnawake, they will be deemed Mohawks of Kahnawake. So when we looked at the demographic projections for our community specifically, that's why we said it could be 35 to 65,000 new registrants. And if we're sitting at 6,600 as the Kanien'kehá:ka of Kahnawake.
So you're talking tenfold then. Wow.
Exactly.
And again, then, and of course they don't attach money to it. And of course they don't attach services. And we're already at max in almost every area, you know, whether it's health or education, always looking for funding.
And that's why we say this whole collaborative process that they're engaging on right now is really dangerous, because it's already done. S3 is done.
Yeah.
They're already changing the way people are categorized in their system. And now they're consulting and saying, well, how do we implement, you know, after the fact?
Yeah.
It's a done deal.
Yeah.
And how do you foresee, you know, whether it is more money, more land,
because it's going to be an issue not just for us, but for all the people across Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about that, you know.
All the Indigenous communities, and that's why I said some people view it as it's a good thing because they have very minimal numbers. So for them, more numbers means potentially more money if they can argue that now they have to service. But, you know,
I don't see that as likely, you know, that they're going to give us all that money.
I
doubt it.
I don't know. And so I think right now it's still imperative for people to understand what's coming. If you didn't already, if you weren't already privy to a presentation because we came to the organization where you work or a community meeting, etc., myself and Brandon took the time last week to do a recording of the actual presentation, and now it's going to be probably aired on KTV, shared on YouTube. We'll probably try to get it on social media so that the word can get out there, you know, to everybody or as many people as possible. And after that, like we said, in terms of the defense coalition group, or, you know, how as a community are we going to push back or address this or come up with, because for me, I don't think it's fair. You talked about the unilateral decision making of the federal government to say, all right, these people are Mohawks now, accept them, and we have criteria, and it has to be on our terms. So let's as a community decide once and for all what's our terms, then how can we open up that circle and allow people to come in. Because, you know, people always bring up historically, well, we adopted and we accepted other nations. Okay, other nations is one thing when they fundamentally think like a Ungwehunwe person. Now, if you're talking 6 generations removed and predominantly non-Indigenous, or, you know, it becomes more difficult. Sure, there's a connectivity and a connection to the community, but it's so far removed. And do we still deem them a part of us?
And then we have all those other people who are connected to us but can't come here, you know, so we got to really take a look at that. There are families out there.
Yep.
You know,
so what's our mechanisms, like I said, and the whole land holdings law.
Well, that's
when people found out that component, you know, they were pretty upset. And like I said, I don't want to talk about it on air specifically, but internally, you know, people were very upset about learning how the status card process works and who controls the land in Kahnawake. So, you know, we really need to come together if we want to have true sovereignty and real control of what goes on here. And, you know, I'll say it, I have no problem with breaking away from the Indian Act, but what does that mean for us? And are we ready?
And what's in place?
Exactly.
We have to have something in place, or else it'll be all chaos. I have a question about the laws. You mentioned that a law has to go within 1 year when it goes to...
If it's an urgent
law.
Urgent law.
Any other law can take long, and I'll use the question. I have a question from a community member. What happened with the tobacco law that was 3 years ago and still hasn't been issued? So is that because it wasn't urgent and still not gone through? I'm trying to differentiate between the two.
The problem that happened with the tobacco law is we couldn't get a categorization. To anybody who looked at tobacco, it should have been a type 2. It's a regulatory law. Only the people who are engaged in tobacco activities, etc., you know, this law would govern. but there was pushback from, the tobacco working group or whatever to say, no, we want it to be a type 1. We want the whole community to have a say and whatever. So you ended up getting this process that was like a unique made for tobacco process, and it just never went anywhere. And then the way the sessions were going in the hearing, you had, I'll say it was stacked meetings.
Okay.
People's staff of their tobacco factories were forced to be there and be yes people. Yep. And that's not the way the CDMP was intended to be. So it got stagnant. And then they wanted to propose that the definition of a Ganyagahaga of Kahnawake is anybody who lives in the community, which totally went against the membership law or the Ganyagahaga of Kahnawake law, where we said, no, a Ganyagahaga of Kahnawake in this law means this, and you have to have consistency across your laws. So that was a stalemate, because we know there's people who are engaged in the tobacco industry who are not members of the community.
But it's so interesting how important membership becomes front and center. Until like it's settled, it affects every other thing. And a lot of people, I think, sometimes don't see the connection between all of the other elements, an identity of who we are.
So in my experience, I've been on council for 9 years now. The tobacco law has gone through 4 portfolio chiefs and maybe 3 different tobacco working groups, and we could never come to an agreement of how this could function in our community.
Okay.
And look now where the industry is. It's like, it's not thriving. It could have been, it should have been. And the collective benefiting, whether it was on a carton or on a case, and some people didn't have that collective mind of, nope, my business is my business and I'm going to pocket every penny. So it never went anywhere.
Well, before we got to this, we'll take a break and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Tetewathá Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacy, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Kahsennenhawe Sky-Deer. We did have a question from a community member, and the question has to do with laws. And what constitution, whose constitution is this law under? That's the exact question.
And which law are they talking about?
I'm-
Bill S3,
I know,
tobacco,
I'm not
we've talked
sure.
about how many different laws,
Membership.
membership.
True.
And
Which one?
I'm sure we've had this constitutional debate in our community, because if we say, well, Ganeret Goa is the constitution of the, Haudenosaunee people, we don't utilize that lawmaking process, and people say, well, your CDMP is, and I've heard this before, a bastardization of the clan system, etc. We're not using the Canadian Constitution and the Charter and all that. So, and I know it's been proposed in the past for Kahnawake to have its own Kahnawake-made constitution. What does that look like? Is it an amalgamation of Ganeret Goa and putting today's standards, concepts, ideologies? So at this point, it's the will of the people of the community. I can't necessarily tie it to. We try to ensure that laws are, if not equal to or better than what's happening on the outside, ensure that there's laws of natural justice, ensuring that things are fair. So, moving forward, the creation of our own Justice Act, our own court system, we need to put these mechanisms in for ourselves, because we don't want to be held and tied to being stuck going to Quebec Superior Court or, Canadian courts, which ironically, as of late.
I know. And I guess what's really interesting is I had a chance to speak to the Grand Chief last week, and Kenneth and Gonadogo Hemlock and different people. And we seem to be at a crossroads for ourselves. Do you get that same thought given where you're at? And I mean, I'm not in every high level, but just the stuff I'm reading and here, we as a community need to come together and start stepping up and giving some substance to some of these things we're talking about,
Yep. And I'll go back to, again, that vision statement, 2029. That's 9 years away, 10 years away. But I feel like a lot of the groundwork has been done. Now it's about leadership, and who is going to take the ball and ensure that we can come to a good place and we can inspire people to buy into a new way forward. And what that looks like, I actually had a good discussion yesterday with Dwayne Stacy at KSS, who's in the social studies department. And young people who are growing up don't know the history of this community and why we're in this dysfunctional state. And they don't know what to believe, and well, what's the right longhouse, and how come the MCK this, and why is there all these churches? It's the history and evolution of our community, and they don't understand that there was a time when all our culture, ceremonies, language was underground. We weren't allowed to speak it. There was Indian day school going on here. There was people who went through residential school. So now we're at, like you said, this crossroads, and you can see the resurgence that's happening and people wanting to reclaim their identity, their language, our culture, and maybe get back to a path where we displace the Indian Act influences that have been plaguing our people for generations,
And it goes a couple of generations. I mean, my grandma used to talk about it, and I don't remember my great-grandparents, but I know these kinds of things were talked about because they weren't allowed to speak language. They weren't allowed to. She ended up in residential school. So, you think of all these breaks of where we come to today have all impacted where we are.
Yep. And then... Well, I
have another question. MCK entered into a 2 to 3 year gaming agreements. Can the community view those as agreements? They were signed on behalf of the community using the collective rights.
For, I guess, the playground and what's supposed to be opening today, Magic Palace.
Yeah.
Can they view the agreements? I mean, like you said, they are signed on behalf of the community by council, but they're business agreements, for the collective benefit, as mentioned. And only after both are in operation for a year will we see that monies come back to the community. But the investment strategy was a very smart play on behalf of Playground in terms of when the 3-year expires now, are we going to have all this pressure from the community to say, no, we're a part of it now. So it's going to be interesting as this plays out, and what actually, I won't even go there. I don't want to talk about Quebec, but it's not for me to decide or say. At this point, I'm only a representative on behalf of the council as a whole. But in past experiences, when there have been, business agreements and negotiations, they're usually, for lack of a better word, confidential.
Yeah.
And just to assure the community, no one is individually benefiting. I've heard those kind of stories and allegations that we're getting kickbacks or, lining our own pockets. Anytime we do business agreements like this, it's to generate revenue for the community, because a lot of times from the federal government, we're not covering all of the services that we need to, and just yesterday or the other day, we had a presentation about a Kahnawake field house for when sports are competing at the arena for hockey, figure skating, lacrosse. Let's have another venue where, the kids can go and engage in sports and practice and train, etc. And they're not competing against each other. So we don't have money for that. We want to, or any other, like we talked about the language and culture, we're not getting right at this moment. So we find ways to generate money to for the community investment fund. We set aside $3 million and said, okay, any community ideas, projects, here's this, lump sum of money, and we're going to have to replenish that, because now there's an expected standard that the community is going to be like, oh, well, anything we want to develop, where's the money? Council, you're getting money on behalf of the collective. Well, show us. Well, here it is. Access it.
And I think that's one of the biggest critical things in any of this has been there's no real plan that says the money goes to this or to that. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean on the radio. I'm talking in meetings and things. And I think that's the skepticism. And I hear that all the time from people. We're going to have this money from gaming. Well, where is it going to go? Who is going to be the benefit? And I don't need an answer on air. Right. But people people want to know, because when you look at the grand scheme of things, so many areas are still fundraising.
Yeah.
You know, and it makes you wonder, how come we're supposed to have all this money? Why are we still fundraising in sports, in recreation, in language, in culture? And I mean, it's pretty bad, you know, that, you know, we have some schools that are still fundraising to maintain their annual thing. And I guess those are the questions that people in the community, I hear it all the time.
Yeah.
I guess because I'm always on the fundraising side of things, and helping out a bunch of groups and things. So, you know, people wonder. And I think that's where a lot of the skepticism, and, you know, some people like to throw their own thing on, you know, to say that someone's lining their pockets. And to me, it's just a statement. These are our priorities. This is where the money's going to go.
Yeah. And
you
I
know,
mean,
and that's what I think people are questioning.
and every year we put out the budget, you know, of how much it costs to run the whole community and how much we get from the federal government. So there's all those gaps, you know, that we're required and responsible to cover to ensure service delivery continues. And I don't know if it's that community members want to feel it individually in their hand, then it becomes
some people,
tangible.
I would say, but for the most part, I think people just don't understand. And when you look at those financial statements, they're intimidating, unless you're familiar with statements. You know, for a large part, most of our people aren't. You know, I'm just a, you know, it's just a thought, but, you know, it's because that's what I hear when I'm out and about in different circles, and not always in the same circles, but I hear that from people. And I think if people had a little bit more understanding, this is our priorities, these are our lists, these are the things. You know, when people saw the improvements, like the splash pad and the parks improving, now we're getting a baseball field, a regular. People don't mind that because people see tangible type things.
New cultural center, theater.
You know, like, you know, when people start to see those kinds of things, then people are saying, okay.
Yeah.
But it's when you don't see, there's, you know.
And maybe there could be a recommendation to hive out the budget of the monies that go, like you said, into the community directly. That, you know, like,
that people don't see, like, into the student program, into the different things. So people know these are our priorities. Here's where we've helped in the last little while. And I think that's the little bit of a gap in between, you know, people saying we're getting this money, but we're not seeing.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Well,
and it's just a feedback, just a thought.
Definitely.
I have a comment from a woman who said that Gus is a great talker, and they wish she would run for Grand Chief in the next election.
Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the first time I have heard, you know, that kind of encouragement. I question whether I'm too young, you know. I guess I'll be 42 the time of the next election to be Grand Chief. If, you know, the community and people encourage that, I guess more so.
Right.
And yeah, looking around at the table and seeing, you know, who's saying, well, this is their last term, or that, you know, they're not interested anymore. Lloyd Phillips just vacated his post at council, and Grand Chief Joe Norton expressed that this is possibly, you know, his last. So we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But whoever that is, Nyawakoa, for your vote of confidence.
Okay, so I have another question. What is going on with Centre Solution? Does Alwyn Morris hold the head chair at DEWA that should be helping job creation for people having control on a building, the business, giving less than 10% of the jobs to our people? I don't know if that's something you can answer, but it was a question from a community member.
Well, at this point, because we are in litigation, you know, I've been advised not to speak. Also, this isn't my portfolio. I don't really have anything related to gaming, but it is a sensitive topic at this point because, like I said, the court proceeding is moving forward after the injunction and so forth. But yeah, I'd rather not. I'd rather not comment. We'll wait and see how things proceed.
We have probably like about 2 minutes. Anything else? Any other work that's going on or topics that you'd like to just touch on?
Well, again, it's Winter Carnival going on right now, and I'm no longer part of the Kahnawake Youth Center Board of Directors. Harry Rice took my place. But again, encouraging community members to get out there. I was supposed to participate in the organizational bowling last night. We had the
MCK,
Chiefs, and then I ended up, because I have this sinus thing going on, I was like, no, I'm not going to play. But, you know, for people to get out there and participate in these activities, the Youth Center goes through, you know, a whole planning process to put this on behalf of the community. And like we said, despite the winter and how
crazy it's been, I know they've had to
Exactly.
cancel just the football. That had to be. They said they went to try and measure for the field and for the snowshoeing thing, and it's just ice. So they were concerned that you know, people could get hurt, because usually it's a pretty big event. And you know, Kyle was mentioning yesterday that they're looking over 3,000 people who would have participated.
Exactly.
We joke because every time he comes, it gets bigger and bigger. It was a 1 week, then it was a 2 week. Now we're going into like 2.5, closing
Right.
to 3. But Winter Carnival has kind of taken on a life of its own. You know, has gotten bigger. So.
And one final thing, like we said, that it's the 2019 Year of Indigenous Languages. Be aware of the activities that are going to be going on in our community, and encouraging the use of Ganyageha, Chatduanizarage, Asatstene, Zawana, Gohikazi, Yori Hawana. And if you know, a few words a day, you
Yeah.
know, it expands your vocabulary, and, you know, it's empowering. Like you said, now, Awado Asiro Kahsennenhawe.
Yes, I'm proud of myself, and I have a few other ones too. So I'm very proud of that. And like I said, I'll continue to work on it. Thank you so much for coming in and giving your time. Coming up on Monday on Tetewathá, Peggy Mayo stand-up will be joining me. We will be talking about Golden Age and other topics. Up next with the 1 o'clock news is Dara Hemmings. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Onagiwahi.